In this episode, the lock-in is in New York City. I'm joined by Andrew Dobner, who lives in the heart of New York City with his wife and young daughter. He has a history of living in hotspots, having escaped Libya during the Arab Spring, and now I find out how a family in New York City gets by in the time of the virus. I'm Brett Farrell, and this is The Lock-In. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my video off just to preserve bandwidth on this side because it's Australia and we don't have great internet.
Sure, no worries. I'll talk to your very intense photo.
Yeah, that was taken actually 10 years ago. Yeah, just on 10 years ago. And I was playing around with filters and I thought that one looks about as scary as I could possibly get.
I will be very polite to you, Brett, and I will say nothing has changed.
Oh, thank you. I haven't aged a bit. How nice
You're
of you
welcome.
to say so. Andrew, you live on Broadway in New York City on the Upper West Side. What is life like in New York City at the moment?
Surreal is basically the best way of saying it. So we live up in the high 90s on Broadway. It's a very bustling area. Broadway, if anyone hasn't been to New York, is a meandering road that goes from the high Upper West Side all the way down to full downtown, and it's really the only street or main street that doesn't operate on a grid system other than some of the historical Dutch ones down the bottom. And it's the thoroughfare. So you're going from downtown all the way up through to, you can exit all the way up onto the Henry Hudson to go through the Bronx and head north out of the city. I mean, I cannot hear a car now.
What does it usually sound like, though?
Oh, it's screaming, yelling, hundreds of people walking up on the street, fire engines and ambulances constantly. You'd be looking at 20 to 30 cars at any individual traffic light at any particular time.
And
I'm staring out the window now. There's one bus and one car. That's it.
Any people wandering around?
Only delivery people, which is very interesting because New York is the city built on staying at home and ordering what the hell you want. And delivery guys come and deliver it to your door. And that's the only ones that are really out and about at the moment, other than the odd people going and collecting their own laundry or lining up in front of a grocery store because they're not allowing people in en masse to grocery stores.
Goodness me. So what's it like being at home? What are you doing just to pass the time at the moment if you can't go out anywhere?
Yeah, it's fun. I think my work has found the value in it because I'm working around 10 to 12 hours a day and definitely not billing for it. The reality is you just sit in a chair and do work and then try to entertain your kids because we're apartment living. So we have a relatively large apartment, but it's only 100 square meters.
That's okay. So by New York standards, that's a big apartment?
Oh, it's huge. That's massive.
Okay. And look, for those playing along at home, you also got an Australian accent. So I can say you've grown up in Australia. Yeah. What does it? Just give us a flavour of what it would be like to say a house in the suburbs with a nice garden and living in that kind of lifestyle to being effectively in an apartment now 24 hours a day.
You can't get out. So even when you do get out, you have to avoid people. And because everybody lives in the apartment, they all go to the same park. So for the people that are left in the city, because a lot have left, you have 1,000 people that have all decided to go down to the minimal parks, and social distancing doesn't really work that well. So a lot of your time is really just spent cooped up because you don't want to go out into the common areas. You don't want to use the elevator because you don't know who's touched it, type of thing. So you walk up and down the stairs quite a lot. And then even little things like deliveries don't come the way they used to. So you have to go and collect them. Your doorman doesn't collect them anymore.
You know, it reminds me of that old Billy Joel song, Miami 2017, where he's got that line in it. And it was a sort of a futuristic looking song where he said he's seen the lights go out on Broadway. And I've never imagined what the lights going out on Broadway look like. But can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, it is funny. So, like, for example, at nighttime, you get used to having noise. You just get used to sleeping through noise. And if you can't get used to it, you have a white noise machine. I don't know if you remember, I think it was a late 80s film with Michael J. Fox, which was Doc Holliday. I think it was Doc Holliday, where he got stranded out of the city, and he couldn't sleep because it was too quiet. So he had to put a tape recording of noise on so he could get to sleep. That
So how's
converse
it affecting you?
it's weird. Like I'm actually not sleeping because I'm used to hearing noise, but now I'm getting used to it because it feels like I'm on holiday. But you look out the window and there is no lights on whatsoever. When you walk down into places like Times Square, if you're brave enough to go down there, the billboards are all flickering, but no one's around, which is just surreal. For such a bustling city, I mean, it's long beyond the city that doesn't sleep. That is an old version of New York, but there is definitely always things going on. Now the only thing you hear are ambulances, and then that adds the other morbidity to it because you start to wonder where all them are going.
Yeah. And how does that play into your head, hearing that?
I'm a pretty upbeat type of guy. I'm a great believer in the only thing you're really in control of is your own approach to life. But that doesn't mean that I'm not immune to the crap situations.
Yeah.
I do wonder. Like, for example, I couldn't get out of a couple of things, a couple of meetings, and 2 Mondays ago I had to go to the office, and I was very wary of anybody. I actually sat next to a guy who wasn't coughing for any particular reason other than he had an itchy throat. But I got up and I moved away from him, and I felt quite embarrassed doing that because I knew that he wasn't, well, I suspected he wasn't doing anything because of COVID, but, you just don't know. And so you do start to have those thoughts in your head of, hang on, that person that I walked to a little bit closely in the park, they looked a little sick or they had a runny nose or whatever. So then you start getting a little bit OCD, like in your washing of hands. And I don't think I've washed my hands as much in my life as I do now.
Well, hygiene's good.
Hygiene is good. Yes, I agree.
So how old's your daughter now?
She is almost 5. She is actually going to be spending her 5th birthday in lockdown.
Oh, man. What are you going to do for that kind of party?
In 2 weeks. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So it's probably going to be 1 or 2 friends on a video and trying to make it as fun as she has in her head. But, I mean, it's not going to happen. But
well, you could do some fun stuff, though, Andrew. You could dress up as like a birthday fairy or something.
That has happened. I mean, the worst part was my parents were actually supposed to fly over on Wednesday and spend her birthday with her. So they're obviously not being able to do that.
Man, the impacts on family life are just incredible. But how are you holding up with it all?
Well, we're in a slightly different situation because Rebecca's my wife, Rebecca and I, we actually worked in remote locations and we're often living in hotels, living and working in them for about 3 to 4 years. So for us, it's not that unusual. You're having to do what you would normally do in the same location without moving. The added issue is that now you have a very vibrant, almost 5-year-old who doesn't understand the concept of not going out, understands that people are getting sick, but you have to sort of keep her occupied without letting your own depressive thoughts come across you, and trying to get her to understand that, daddy has to be on. Yes, it is the 6th phone call for the day. Yes, I understand. And I can't talk to you while I'm trying to talk to my clients.
Yeah.
So you just have to juggle. That doesn't mean that it's any easier for us because it's not. It's hard.
How long have you been on lockdown at the moment? I know New York's had some pretty draconian measures put in place recently. So how long have you been sort of shut in?
So we're finishing our 2nd week now. It's been on slowdown for the week prior to that, where you noticed, like if you take a subway as an example, a subway usually has about 45 seats, and then so those will always be full, with around double that standing.
Wow.
So on the beginning, so 3 weeks ago, you started to see that subways were half full on the seating capacity and maybe 6 people standing at either end of the subway. So those sorts of things occurred. Then there started to be non-essential travel, non-essential meetings. So a lot of meetings were cancelled. A lot of training was cancelled. Certain things, in my opinion, that went ahead that shouldn't have gone ahead, like religious gatherings, weddings, things like that. In that week, people were still doing them. My personal opinion is that they didn't need to occur. I mean, maybe a wedding, but some of the things should have shut down. But after the end of that 3 weeks ago, those sorts of things were a no-no. Nobody did anything. For example, our neighbour 2 doors down, they were planning on having their wedding, I think it was two Thursdays ago. Mm-hmm. So they did get married, but it was just the 2 of them. And then we went to their apartment to make 5 people for their reception.
Oh, man. Did they make the most of it? Was it all actually kind of a depressive affair?
It was a little depressing. It wasn't a nice occasion because you did notice, like, you know, their family drove in, saw them from a car and drove off. So that was really quite hard. And she'd flown over on the last plane from London.
Oh, goodness.
To be with him, and then...
You may as well just binned it for a year.
Well, herein lies the issue with the American system, and I am by no means getting on board a political bandwagon, but if you're marrying, if you're over here and you're going to be with an American, you need to be on health insurance. So
right.
If you're not married, you ain't got no health insurance. So
so there is reason behind.
There's practical reasons, yes.
Yeah, okay. And how long do you think the authorities will have you kept locked in? Yeah.
Well, I use an Australian saying all the time over here, and no one understands it. But how long's a piece of string? I have absolutely no idea. Like we heard today that Trump was saying that he's considering putting New York City in full quarantine, which means no one out unless you're on a 2-week self-isolation. What it means of coming in, I don't know. But our cases are peaking. Everybody thinks they're peaking, but they're peaking day on day. So there is no real way of knowing.
Dealing with things over a prolonged period of time and the impact they have on us, just as, you know, as dads and as husbands and just guys trying to live life. You know, thankfully, I know your wife Beck, she's in recovery now from a bout of breast cancer treatment last year. How is that, which is, you know, great, she's on the other side of it, but with everything you went through last year and now everything you're facing this year, does it compound or do you see the joys in the recovery phase and move on to the next thing?
I mean, it's a good question. I do like your reference to it as a bout of breast cancer. It reminds me of a mistake that I made when we found out that she had it. When I slightly referred to it as a cold that you just need to get over.
Husband
anyone
points.
who finds out that their partner has breast cancer, don't lead with it's just a cold that you need to get over. It's hard.
You said that.
And neither can I, because I'm a relatively logical guy. But then, you know, sometimes the logic just sort of overrides the emotional humanity. But anyway, so the bout of breast cancer, it was tough. Like it's a hard situation. You don't want to see anyone you know having to go through that. And then the destruction that causes on a person's life is huge.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, you can look at it from multiple ways, but she's through it. But you know, we don't know what that's done for her immunity levels. So the people who are at most at risk for this thing are people with respiratory and low immune systems. So we've been told that she's fine. So it is a thing you have in the back of your head. You know, when Rebecca decides, you know, I'm going to go out for a 2-hour run again, you're like, ugh. You know, but there's only certain battles that I can or I need to fight.
Yeah.
And that isn't one to fight. The hard part is really keeping Alice's head. She's our daughter, her head up, because for 1 year she really couldn't interact with Rebecca at all, not from any necessarily sickness type of thing, but Rebecca was physically and medically destroyed as such, particularly when she was going through chemo all the time and then through surgery where, she couldn't pick up Alice, she couldn't do anything with her. But
goodness.
And so, it's hard when you say, Alice, you can't play with anybody, and then you can't play with mum, sorry, and now you can play with mum, but you can't play with anyone else. So you sort of have to keep her on a positive. Luckily, we've got a very, very positive kid. So she sort of just rolls with the punches. But we're only 2 weeks in, and she's already saying, I need to go back to school because I miss my friends. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens when it's 4 weeks in.
Well, Andrew, if there is any...
And you said earlier...
Yeah, sorry,
you said earlier as well that how long is this thing potentially going to be? Well, I know that as a company, we're planning on this being for 3 months.
Wow. Okay. Well, the silver lining for Alice then is at least she can hold mummy during this time.
Yeah. And then that adds its own issue because mummy has to work.
Yeah.
So, you're home with us all the time.
Play with me,
I can't play with you because I got to work. So it's sort of, you can't play with me last year because I'm sick. You can't play with me this year because I'm working.
Yeah.
And so it's a management process. And I really, I was brought up by my mum to say, it really just, a kid's reaction is based on the parent's reaction. So if a parent approaches something very pragmatically, regardless of what they truly believe, then kids feed off that.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? Sort of that, hey, family, let me tell you the truth and let's just talk about it versus some other balance of let's just be in denial and everything's going to be fine. It's you've got to find that way to communicate some truth without panic.
Yeah, completely agree. Now, even if you are panicking yourself, you owe it to your child.
You mentioned New York being a delivery culture. What things are being delivered at home? What can you get?
Whatever you want. It's strange. The city is very strange. And anyone who hasn't been or lived here will not really understand it. But if you come from I'll use in inverted commas, a socialist country like Australia where you open your own door and you do your own washing and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You don't do that here. You get someone to pick up your clothes to take them to their laundry, and then they do them and they iron them and they bring them back to you and hang them up in your closet. And if you want a food delivery guy to get you one plate of Chinese, one plate of curry, and one plate of barbecue wings, that's what you get. And you can still get all that. Certain things like cleaners, like shirt cleaners, for example, they're only opening for an hour, so you could do drop off and pick up.
Yeah.
The UPS store.
So it's not as bad as you have to do your own ironing yet. No,
don't be silly. That would be completely crazy. The streets would be amok. No. Last night I got a delivery of food from somebody completely over the other side of Manhattan, of food and wine. Like they deliver it.
Yeah.
And you just pay for that service. And even the market, the grocery store that's literally right across the road that I'm staring at right now, people find it too difficult in our building to go across there and do their own shopping. So they dial in their order and then go downstairs to the doorman and pick it up.
Wow.
That sort of stuff's still happening.
So it seems like in some respects, New York's still business as usual, except there's just less people out in the streets.
Yeah, and this is where you get to the social inequality of this city, is that there's no system in place for protection for people who have to continue with those things.
Okay, so they are working.
And I did say before, they are working completely at risk. Yeah, okay, some of them at their own expense have got gloves and got face masks at their own expense. But if they don't work, they don't get nothing. They don't even have health insurance, so they're not going to do that. And you do find it difficult. It's a real quandary because you say, well, hang on, I don't want to order something to put somebody at risk, but if I don't order something to put somebody at risk, that person doesn't make any money, period. There's no safety net for these guys. Like we had a similar situation, and sometimes I will sound a little bolshy when I say things like this, but we have a cleaner, for example, and we were going to say to her, look, just don't come in, but we put it to her based on what her traveling situation was, because we know that if we don't pay her, she doesn't get any income.
Goodness.
So it's a real hard situation because of those things.
Well, I don't know how I'd go with that, but I still think people need to eat, right?
They do that, yes. But do you need to order from the same restaurant? Do you need to force that restaurant to stay open in order for them to turn over 5 meals? Or luckily, this $2 trillion package that the government has put through is going to provide some form of safety net for people in those situations. But
well, it's funny because here we've got these massive queues at the moment outside our social security offices, and it's not really been seen before because everyone in the entertainment industry, the travel industry, leisure, are all out of work at the moment. So they're now queuing up for the government-provided social net, and there's queues. Queues are out the street and down the road, miles long. At least we have that here.
Yeah.
Some kind of help for people.
Yeah, there is one thing that they do that Americans do extremely well, better than, like, I've lived in 15 countries. I've never seen anything like this, where the mega rich, the upper class, the 1% that is always bastardized because everybody just wants an enemy. When it comes to situations like this, when Broadway, as in the West End version of Broadway, with all the theaters closing down, there are funds set up by rich people or persons with more money than me, for example, to provide a safety net for them.
Right.
So let's say you have 1,000 actors, there's more than that. They can dip into this fund that's been set up by producers and by benefactors and stuff. And they do that extremely well here. There's like fundraising here is amazing. And this type of thing has kicked in where there are funds now for delivery drivers so that delivery drivers can afford, and when I call drivers, I really mean bicycle riders. That's all they are.
Okay.
So that they are in some form of protection, and that some first responders or emergency workers are able to buy equipment for their children so that they can still do some form of schooling, because a lot of people can't afford to just buy a simple laptop for their kid.
Oh, goodness. Now, Andrew, you mentioned you lived in a number of countries. Now, I know one of those countries was Libya, and you were working, I think, for a petrochemical company, and just around the time of the Arab Spring. You said this is the worst you've been in. How does this compare to something like the Arab Spring and being kicked out of a country?
Yeah, I mean, just to correct that, I was working for an engineering firm, but
sorry.
The real difference between the two is that I don't like using the word enemy because enemies are a wrongly used term, but you knew who the enemy was. You can see them.
Yeah.
So I drive down the road. I know that person who's carrying a gun is highly potentially the person that is going to be someone I need to look out for. But I'm looking at some bloke walking down the road who I can't see has coronavirus. He's not the enemy, but he's carrying that enemy. So that is the main difference. That
so a constant state of vigilance or hypervigilance, but not knowing whether
so
you need
weird.
to or not.
You just And New Yorkers are very similar to, there's only two places that I've lived in that are similar to this, Perth and New York, where if you're walking down the street and someone's walking towards you, neither of you are going to move until you hit each other. New Yorkers are very similar like that. But you get to this 3 feet out point and everybody suddenly goes, I have to move. No, you have to move. What do we do here?
Wouldn't New Yorkers be telling the other guy to move?
Yeah, but it's funny. People say that New Yorkers are bolshy and New Yorkers are arrogant and rude. That's not even close to the truth. And you see that here. Yesterday, I was on a phone call at about 5 o'clock with somebody, and all of a sudden I heard cheering and shouting and clapping, and people just hanging out the window, just clapping and cheering for no reason. I was trying to figure out the reason. I saw a police car. Well, that police car is always there. It wasn't for that, but everyone was just generally keeping everybody upbeat.
It's like an internal version of a Mexican way.
Yeah, exactly.
One last question before we finish up. What are you doing in your own headspace just to try and stay healthy and alert and stay on top of things?
Look, I'm not, you know me, Brett. I'm not a superhero. But I have a confidence in God that in certain scriptures that I hung on to, that I've always hung on to, whether that's in Libya or when I was in London or anything like that. And I hang on to those. I don't hang on to them from the point of view of God's gonna keep me protected from all harm. I don't buy into that. I've never bought into that. But I do believe that God has plans and paths for you that unfortunately sometimes include situations like this. And I'm unabashed in that. Like, I'm unabashed in my belief that God has the best for you, even sometimes when you go through the crap.
Andrew, thanks for sharing that, and thank you for joining us all in the lock-in.
No worries.
I'm Brett Farrell, and this is The Lock-In.